Hey friends, tonight we're going way back. Before cell phones, before sliced bread, before even the idea of maps had fully dried on goat hide. You're drifting across the African Horn, where the air is thick with heat and the scent of something ancient. Dried resin, crushed leaves, maybe a whisper of camel sweat. It is the kind of air that carries memory, the kind that clings to your skin and makes history feel like something you could reach out and touch if you weren't already half asleep. The place? What would later be called Ethiopia. But back then, it didn't need a name. It was just here, and it was important because it smelled amazing. Seriously, the lands we're exploring tonight traded gold and ivory, sure, but also something much rarer, scent. You're about to trace a history of trade so deeply fragrant that ancient empires literally burned money just to smell nicer. And yes, they use camels, obviously. So before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing who's nodding off where. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some soft background hum, and let's slip into tonight's journey. You open your eyes to heat waves rising from red earth. Your feet sink slightly into the dust, loose, soft, and older than anything you've ever walked on. It's morning, but the sun already presses hard against your shoulders. Every step kicks up the scent of cinnamon, old wood, and earth warmed too long. There are no buildings here, no roads, just animal tracks, and the low murmur of people moving carefully, quietly, like they're part of the ground. The first sound you really notice is a bell, not like a church bell, more like a dull iron clink muffled by the fabric. You turn and see it, a caravan approaching. 30 camels, maybe more, led by sun-darkened figures with long staffs and simple indigo tunics. The camels walk slowly, deliberately, with a resigned look camels always have, like they've seen the future and aren't impressed. You fall in step beside them, and nobody tells you to leave. Maybe they think you're supposed to be here. Maybe you are. They're carrying gold. You don't see it. It's buried in cloth, stuffed in leather bags strapped tight to the camel's sides, but you can feel it. The camel's grown with the weight. Occasionally, a flap of cloth slips, and you catch a glint, dull yellow, smooth by handling, warm like sunlight trapped in stone. But gold is just one half of this trade. The other half, the part that really matters, is invisible. Its smell. The air shifts. One of the caravan guards opens a box, and a puff of scent rolls over you. Frankincense. It's sharp and sweet at the same time, like pine needles and honey set on fire. Another box holds myrrh, darker and muskier, like old libraries and wet bark. These aren't just perfumes, they're currency, spiritual tools, medicine, bribes. Some people even thought these resins could ward off demons. Others just liked how fancy they smelled. You ask someone, maybe out loud, maybe not, why people walk through so much desert just for smells. They shrug. Because the gods don't take coins, someone mutters. Fair enough. You break for rest under an acacia tree. The shade barely helps, but the breeze brings relief. Someone hands you dried meat, wrapped in leaves, and a goat skin of sweet fermented milk. Delicious, but an acquired taste. You try not to gag. A child nearby giggles at your expression. As you watch the caravan handlers untie and retie loads, you realize this isn't a random trek. It's a system, a route, one that's been used for centuries. It connects the interior highlands, where resin is harvested and gold is mined to the Red Sea coast. From there, boats carry the scent to Yemen, to Egypt, to temples in Rome, where emperors burn it by the fistful during ceremonies that last for hours. Some of that scent ends up burned in places no one in this caravan has ever heard of. They just walk, trade, rest, repeat. Someone points to a hill in the distance, crowned with circular stone houses. Sabaeans, they say. A trading outpost. You're going there next. When you reach it, it's buzzing with quiet intensity. Donkeys bray, bronze scales clang. A woman with teal head wraps barks at a man who apparently tried to swap fake gold again. You can't hear the whole argument, but you catch the word dung. It's probably not a compliment. In one corner, two merchants whisper while examining lumps of blackish resin. One sniffs, frowns, and tosses it into a wicker basket labeled ritual grade. The other smiles too slyly. Trade is both science and scam here. You notice something carved into the wall. Symbols, curved and looping, half worn away by time and weather. It's an inscription, maybe Ge'ez, maybe Sabaean. Languages so old, your brain forgets how to read just looking at them. A guide nearby says it talks about a trade deal, and people, the morning hits you like a warm wave. You stir to the sound of rustling leaves, soft hooves on sand, and the melodic clinking of copper anklets. Someone nearby is humming, a song so old that even the tune feels like it has calluses. You sit it up slowly. The air is cooler than you expected, but it's only temporary. You already feel the day heating up, stretching its arms over the rocky hills like a sleepy lion. You're still with the caravan. That wasn't a dream, at least, not entirely. By midday, you're deep in the Ethiopian highlands, the landscape shifting around you. Gone is the bare red dust. Now, it's all steep terraces carved into green hills, like 1,000 stairs made for a giant. Goats nibble at grass that clings stubbornly to rocks. Small villages appear, clusters of round huts with thatched roofs and smoke curling lazily from their centers. You pass farmers guiding oxen, their clothes soaked in sweat, faces calm with repetition. One waves at you while chewing on a stick that might be both a toothbrush and a snack. Multitasking. The caravan stops at a town you can't pronounce. You don't need to. It's not here to impress you. It's here because it's useful. This place is an exchange hub, a midway pulse point in the ancient arteries of trade. People come down from the hills with bundles of dried bark, polished stones, little sacks of bright red spices, and of course, the prized resins. Others arrive with goods from far-flung corners, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, Indian pepper, even, no joke, ostrich eggs, giant ones, the size of a child's head. You try not to laugh, but a trader catches your eye and nods proudly. Apparently, they're worth more than gold in some places, because of course they are. There's music too, not the kind you'd blast from headphones, but a rhythmic drumming that sneaks into your chest. It makes even the tired donkeys sway a little. A woman with saffron-dyed robes spins in slow circles, dust spiraling around her feet. You ask what they're celebrating. Someone shrugs and says, "It's Wednesday." Fair enough. As you wander the market, you notice something unusual. A man seated behind an enormous pile of snail shells. They're small, pearly, and piled into a pyramid-like treasure. "Cowries," he says, before you can ask. "Money." You stare. This slimy sea souvenir is ancient Ethiopia's Venmo. Apparently yes. Used across Africa and Asia, cowries were lightweight, hard to forge, and surprisingly stylish. You consider pocketing one before remembering you're here on a sleep mission, not a heist. In one corner, under a canopy of stretched cloth, a debate is brewing. A group of elders sit cross-legged in a loose circle, sipping something steaming from clay cups. You lean in and catch fragments. Something about the Aksumite kings. Something about whether the god Almaka preferred myrrh or gold. And something weirdly about a lion that learned to sing. You're not sure what's real and what's just storytelling, but either way, you're hooked. Historians still debate whether this region had one main trade language or many. Someone tells you. I say, why not both? You only need to understand more than price to do business. He chuckles, then spills tea on his robe. That's what I get for being profound. Before you leave, a boy grabs your hand and drags you to a small shrine carved into the hillside. It's dark inside, lit only by a single oil lamp and the glow from a carved window high above. The air is thick with incense, almost too thick. You cough, and the boy laughs. Holy air, he whispers, like it's a punchline. The shrine holds an ancient stone slab, its face covered in script. You recognize some Gaius letters, but most are too faded. An elder appears silently beside you and points to the center. It says, "This is where the scent was first found," she says. In a dream, a woman followed the trail of sweetness and found the resin tree burning without smoke. She raises an eyebrow. Some say it was real, some say it was marketing. Outside, the camels are reloaded. The handlers tie bundles of fragrant resin, rolls of cloth, and woven baskets brimming with dried herbs. One man struggles to secure a particularly irritable goat, who appears morally opposed to being transported. You decide to keep your distance. Goats remember grudges. You leave the highland village just before sunset. The trail winds upward, revealing wide views of distant valleys, hazed in golden shadow. A hawk glides silently overhead. Your legs ache, but your brain is softening, smoothing out like clay under a warm hand. The rhythm of walking, the sway of camels, the whispering breeze, it all turns hypnotic. You've slipped into the pace of the past, a world without deadlines, a history made of footsteps. That night, you camp beside a shallow river. It smells like moss, wet stone, and wood smoke. You sit by the fire, nursing a bruised toe and watching sparks drift into the stars. A woman next to you is grinding. You wake up with your face full of camel fur. It's not ideal. One of the younger beasts apparently decided you looked like a warm patch of sand and used you as a headrest. You push it off gently, still wrapped in sleep, and sit up to find dawn curling over the mountains like spilled milk. A low pink light casts the whole campsite in dream colors: saffron, lavender, ash gray. You stretch, everything creaks. Today, the road changes again. The trail snakes into lower, hotter territory, closer to the Red Sea. You can feel the moisture disappearing from the air, replaced by a kind of dryness that lives deep in your nose and teeth. The caravan pushes forward, every sound dulled by dust. Your feet crunch over brittle roots. Thorns brush your sleeves. Someone sneezes, and it echoes like a thunderclap. But here's the funny thing. You don't mind. There's something addicting about movement in a land like this. The emptiness makes your thoughts clearer, and the silence wraps you up like a too-hot blanket you refuse to take off. Plus, the path isn't really empty. It just hides its history well. You pass by a crumbling stone outpost, its low walls barely tall enough to hide behind. A camel snorts at it with professional disapproval. Roman, Someone mutters. You blink. Roman? Out here? Yes, they repeat. They came here. Briefly. Lousy tippers. It's true. During the first few centuries, CE, Roman merchants did venture into the Horn of Africa. They were chasing trade winds and perfumes, especially frankincense. This place was the gateway to everything they craved: spices, silk, ivory, and yes, that mysterious golden sap that smelled like royalty in every single Roman bathhouse. And by the way, in case you're wondering, yes, the Romans did write about the region. In fact, one particularly poetic Roman mariner described the coast as a place of golden winds. You're pretty sure he was just trying to impress someone, but still, nice line. As you march on, you notice more signs of human effort. Low terraces dug into hillsides, faint tracks in rock, cairns piled high with meaning only locals would know. Some are tomb markers, your guide says. Others are just offerings or warnings. Depends who you ask. Historians still debate whether these routes were protected by kings or just tolerated by them. The region wasn't a giant empire yet. It was more like a loose confederation of city-states, tribes, and trading towns, all rubbing shoulders and pretending not to argue. Do you get the sense that everyone knew the rules? Don't cheat too loudly. Don't steal the camels. And above all, don't disrespect the smell. Because let's be real, what you're moving through isn't just terrain. It's an olfactory empire. You pass through wadis, where the wind carries the scent of wild thyme and something smoky. You stop at a tiny outpost carved into a canyon wall and are served hot tea that tastes suspiciously like boiled twigs. You accept it anyway, because the woman serving it is balancing an entire brass teapot on her head, and you respect the hustle. By mid-afternoon, you hit what looks like an abandoned village, half swallowed by dust, roofs caved in, walls painted with faint blue circles. A donkey stands on the remains of a stone step, chewing like it owns the place. One of your companions nods at the ruin. Used to be a stopping point for incense traders, until the spring dried up. You step carefully over a collapsed doorway. Inside, a broken clay tablet lies half buried in the sand. The script is unreadable, but the symbols look urgent. You wonder what they were warning people about. Bandits? Heat stroke? Terrible bathroom facilities? Probably all three. That night, the caravan makes camp under a natural rock overhang. The stars are rude with brightness. There are so many, it feels like they're pressing down on you. You lie on your back, trying to spot constellations. Someone points out a shape that looks like a camel doing taxes. You don't see it, but you nod politely. Dinner is flatbread and roasted something. Could be goat. Could be ancient goat. It's edible. The fire crackles, and a man named Kadir begins to hum an old tune. It's low and repetitive, almost like a lullaby. You ask about it. It's a working song, he explains, for carrying things uphill. The rhythm helps the legs forget. You hum it to yourself, tapping your fingers on your knee. And then, a surprise. From the edge of camp, a stranger appears, dusty, smiling, and clearly exhausted. He speaks a different dialect, but you catch the gist. He's a messenger, just came from the coast. He carries with him a satchel of tiny clay flasks, each sealed with resin and marked with a single glyph. They're samples. Inside each is a different variety of frankincense. One lemony, one like cinnamon, one so intense it smells like you just cleaned a cathedral. Traders crowd around, sniffing like wine sommeliers. One snorts and says, "Too sharp." My buyers prefer something By the time you wake, the sun is already burning the horizon gold. Your mouth is dry. Your spine complains as you stand, but your feet move anyway, one after the other, because the caravan is already shifting. Camels rising like awkward boats, packs creaking, traders grumbling into their tea. You scoop a handful of warm water from a goat-skin pouch, splash it over your face, and chew a piece of honeyed flatbread so hard it could pass for construction material. You're on the incense road now, properly. This isn't just a poetic nickname. It's a literal trade artery, carved into the continent by centuries of footsteps, hooves, and hopes, and it smells like someone left a temple door open. The first thing that hits you today is myrrh, where frankincense is light and airy, like a choir warming up. Myrrh is deep, earthy, and oddly sweet. It clings to your nose and makes the back of your throat feel ancient. It's still harvested the old way, your guide explains, by slicing the bark of commiphora trees and letting the resin bleed out, then harden into tears. Yes, tears. That's the word used. You can decide if that's beautiful or just super dramatic. The group stops at a high ridge overlooking a valley where myrrh trees stand like knotted ghosts. A few pickers are already at work, their hands quick and practiced. One hums a song that drifts up to your ears. It's weirdly catchy. You find yourself mouthing it as you descend the switchback path into the valley. Near the trees, the scent becomes overwhelming. The pickers nod at you as you pass, holding small baskets woven from palm fronds. You ask one how they know when to cut. The tree tells you, she says with a grin, but only if you're polite. You decide not to ask follow-up questions. Trees are known to hold grudges. Later that afternoon, you stop at a sun-baked shrine made of stacked stone and bleached camel bone. The altar is empty now, but scorch marks suggest that not long ago someone burned something fragrant in offering. A goat watches you from behind a rock, judging silently. One of the elders in your group tells the tale of how, once upon a time, the gods of this land would only respond to scented smoke. No prayers, no singing, just perfume for the heavens. You wonder if that's why this trade grew so massive. What began as ritual became profit. Isn't that always the way? By now, your legs feel like twisted rope. You sit on a rock, breathing dust, and try to calculate how far you've walked since this journey began. It feels like your ankles have aged 10 years. Your sandals agree. As the sun begins to fall, you arrive at a way station carved directly into a cliff wall. It's like someone punched a house into the rock. Cool inside, dark, smells like old stone and older sweat. You settle in a corner, using your pack as a pillow, and stare at a faded mural someone painted in centuries past. It shows a caravan, much like yours, crossing a desert under a crescent moon. But one figure in the mural is turning back, looking over their shoulder toward a tree covered in glowing orbs. You think maybe it's a metaphor, or maybe the artist just got bored. Some say that's a tree of scent, says a voice near you, the one where all perfumes were born. You roll over and find an elderly man sitting beside a pouch of dates. He offers you one. It's surprisingly juicy. Of course, he adds, others say it's just a fig tree that caught fire once, and people got poetic. Historians, you recall, still argue about how much myth crept into the early incense trade. Some suggest the tree of scent was a coded map, a way to signal safe stops along the route without alerting raiders. Others think it was just marketing. Come to our port, One ancient flyer might have said, home of the original scent tree, guaranteed divine access. You fall asleep before you can decide which version you prefer. That night, your dreams are strange. You're back in the valley of myrrh, but the trees are whispering your name in 10 languages. One of them grows a human face, which tells you a very specific joke about donkey taxes. You wake up laughing and then realize you're chewing on your own sleeve. Dawn comes again, like a curtain lift. The group moves out early, spurred by rumors of pirates near the coast. You don't ask questions. You've learned by now that the fewer details you hear about desert pirates, the better. As the caravan crests another ridge, the view opens up into a river valley threaded with green. Finally, a splash of life in this endless sand painting. Terraces glint in the light, and small farms stretch like chessboards along the water. A woman in a teal headscarf waves as you pass. Behind her, a cow looks unimpressed by all human affairs. Down in the valley, you learn something new. Apparently, one of the rarest incense ingredients is harvested from a species of beetle that burrows into certain tree roots. When it dies, its shell leaves behind a compound used in. You wake to the sound of a man yelling at a goat, not yelling in anger, more like trying to reason with it. You can't see the goat, but judging from the way the yelling keeps alternating between coaxing and muttered threats, you guess it's not going well. By now, you're so used to waking up in odd places that it takes a moment to remember where you are. On the edge of a plateau, halfway between the ancient incense farms and the glittering coast, where the Ethiopian gold once shimmered in riverbeds like lost sunlight. This stretch of the journey is less traveled today, but once it was the golden artery of the kingdom of Aksum. Aksum, yes, you've heard of it. The land of giant obelisks and royal coins stamped with suns and crescents. But right now, none of that matters. What matters is breakfast, and whether someone has figured out how to toast barley on a stone without burning their hands. Spoiler, they haven't. You chew the slightly charred barley like it's a solemn duty and saddle up again. Not on a camel this time, but a donkey who seems to carry generational trauma in his eyes. His name is Murta. He tolerates you barely. As you descend towards the lower ground, the air changes. It smells greener, wetter. There is a river nearby, and soon you see it. A ribbon of water slicing through sandstone hills, its banks lined with brush that practically hums with insects. But what catches your attention are the shallow pans carved into the rock beside the river. This is where gold once happened. Not flashy nuggets like in adventure movies, just fine flakes, dust really, sifted from silt by patient hands. A woman shows you how, scooping sand with a half-gourd pole, swirling it gently until the heavy gold dust settles into the bottom. It sparkles faintly, like the stars you slept under last night. It used to be more, she says. Now, the river is stingy. You nod like you understand, but your arms ache just from watching her do it. Here's the thing. This gold wasn't just for royal rings and shiny statues. No, a lot of it was used to pay for incense. You heard right. While your brain was busy associating gold with crowns and dragons, people here were quietly turning it into holy smoke. Because back then, one pouch of top-grade frankincense could buy a camel. Let that sink in. And when gold prices fluctuated, as they always do, it was incense that stayed stable. In a way, frankincense was the real currency. Some historians even claim that regional conflicts were more about controlling groves than gold. Others disagree, of course, because what's the point of being a historian if you don't get to argue over tree sap? You stop for lunch under a sycamore tree whose shade feels like a miracle. One of your fellow travelers tells a joke about a priest, a camel, and a confused elephant. It's not very funny, but the way he tells it, complete with sound effects, has everyone laughing. Even Murta, in his own donkey way, seems amused. By afternoon, the landscape flattens into salty brushland. Every so often, you pass the ruins of a storehouse, simple stone rectangles where incense was once sealed in clay jars and kept cool with river mud. Sometimes, the jars were marked with glyphs or patterns. One of the symbols, your guide says, might mean royal property or do not shake. No one's quite sure. A quick stop at one ruined site reveals a broken jar, half buried in earth. Inside, still smells faintly of frankincense. You press your nose to it and are instantly transported, like a perfume time machine. You smell temples and traders, candles and coin counting, rituals and rainstorms. It's all in there somehow. You ask how that's possible after all this time. The old man next to you shrugs. Good resin, bad weather. The gods are picky. Later, as the sky dims, you arrive at a coastal inlet where the tide tugs at wooden piers and the air tastes of salt. This is where the big exchanges happen. Caravans from the interior meeting ships from across the Red Sea. The docks are quiet now, used mostly by fishermen and curious tourists, but centuries ago, this inlet was buzzing with Aksumite merchants, yelling prices and weighing bundles of sap on bronze scales. Lapis from the east, ostrich feathers from the south, gold for incense, incense for ivory. Round and round it went, and yes, at one point even rhino horn. You lean on a post and imagine it all. The shouting, the stacking, the sea spray. Somewhere nearby, someone sings a lullaby in Gas, the old tongue of Aksum. You don't understand the words, but they tug at something old in your chest. As night falls, the caravan huddles in a seaside shelter made of woven reed and plaster mud. It creaks in the wind like it has secrets. You share a bowl of lentils, spiced with something citrusy, and talk about everything except what comes next. Outside, the tide goes out, pulling dreams with it. You sleep with the smell of salt and smoke in your nose. You wake up to the sound of waves and a rooster who thinks he's much more important than he is. There's something comforting about being close to the ocean again, even if your bed was basically a woven mat on dirt that may or may not have included a crab as a roommate. You stretch, yawn, and rub your eyes just in time to catch the sky turning that kind of warm peach glow that makes you feel like you're waking up inside a painting. Your caravan is already stirring. The camels grunt. Someone's boiling something in a clay pot that smells suspiciously like fish and garlic. And your favorite donkey, Murta, has wandered off and is now trying to chew a basket. Of course, you follow the shoreline path, boots kicking up sand as your group heads inland again. Today, you're going to the ruins of an ancient incense processing village. It's not far, but the terrain is slow. Pebbles slip underfoot, and the sun heats the stone until it feels like walking across a stovetop. Someone mutters that they wish they had brought 2 pairs of sandals. You silently agree, but out loud you say something brave, like, at least it's a dry heat. Nobody laughs. They're saving their energy. By mid-morning, The first crumbling walls appear on the horizon, sun-bleached and leaning, like old men who have seen too much. This village, your guide explains, was once a hub for processing, packing and storing incense before it traveled north. And the best part? The workshops are still visible. Sort of. You walk through low corridors and shaded courtyards where resin were soaked, sorted, and wrapped in palm fiber. In one corner, there's a raised platform that may have been used for measuring out portions, or, if you believe local legend, for ceremonial dances by the Fragrant priestesses. You're about to ask what that means, but someone hands you a chunk of dried myrrh, and your brain turns to jelly. It's sweet and smoky, and weirdly peppery, like if a tree could make candy for adults. You bite it. Your teeth regret everything. It's not for eating. Apparently, people chewed it to clean their teeth. No fluoride necessary, just good old-fashioned tree sap and a strong jaw. You spot a faded mural on one wall. 3 figures in long tunics, holding bowls aloft as wavy lines rise above them. Smoke. You trace the outlines with your finger, wondering what color it once was. Saffron? Indigo? One local whispers that the colors were made from crushed beetles and river clay. Side note, if beetles ever find out we've been using them for paint, they might revolt. As you leave the village, someone points out a series of small mounds near the edge of the trail. Not hills, not natural. Burial sites maybe, or incense caches. Historians argue about this one a lot. Some say they're symbolic graves for trees that had died. Others roll their eyes and say, nah, it's just storage. But deep down, everyone loves a mystery. You stop for water under a baobab tree with a trunk the width of a tiny cottage. The tree hums with bees, but they don't bother you. You sit in its shade, legs stretched out, and let your mind wander. Your guide tells you that centuries ago, an Aksumite priest merchant might have sat in this exact spot, tallying up debts or praying for safe passage across the desert, or maybe both. Life was complicated back then too. A fly lands on your nose. You try to act like you don't care, but it definitely wins. As a path winds back to higher ground, the group pauses at a hilltop altar. It's just a circle of stone now, but you can almost see what it was. A ritual site where incense was offered to spirits of trade and travel. You're told that before each major journey, traders would light a little myrrh here, just enough to grease the road, so to speak. You kneel beside it and light a pinch of resin from a travel pouch someone hands you. The smoke curls upward, sweet and sharp. It catches in your throat, and just like that, you're crying for no reason. Not sad, not happy, just moved. The way you get when a story finds a part of you that forgot it was waiting to be found. By sundown, your caravan sets up camp in a valley ringed with wild thyme and dusty lavender. Someone plays a stringed instrument softly, 3 notes, again and again, a kind of lullaby. You lie back and watch the first stars flicker into place. One by one, the travelers drift off. Even Murta stops chewing things. You close your eyes, your mind filled with beetle paint murals, invisible merchants, and the scent of history rising in little curls of smoke. Tomorrow, they say, you'll reach the highlands. But for now, you sleep with your hand resting on the pouch of resin, like it might whisper dreams if you're lucky. You wake up before dawn, not to the sweet scent of breakfast or the chatter of a peaceful palace, but to the sound of someone throwing up behind a wagon. Welcome to the aftermath of the Kalinga War. The smoke hasn't even cleared, and already the stories are pouring in. Thousands dead, villages gone, fields trampled beyond repair. And you're stiff, sore, and there's dry blood on your sleeve. Though you're not sure whose it is. It's not heroic, it's not glorious, it just is. Ashoka stands not far off, staring into the distance like he's trying to read the wind. His black horse fidgets. His face, usually set in that I know what I'm doing expression, is hollow, haunted even. You watch as a messenger approaches with another casualty count. Ashoka listens, nods. For the first time since you've known him, he doesn't speak. He just turns and walks toward the riverbank. You follow at a distance. There he is, your emperor, kneeling in mud, hands shaking, as he cups water and washes the blood from his palms. Except it's not just blood he's washing away. It's something deeper, something heavier. As the sun rises over the battlefield, it hits his face just right, and you swear you see something shift in him, like a thread snapping, or maybe being tied. Later, you overhear him talking to a monk. Yes, a monk. One of those quiet, saffron robe types that somehow didn't get trampled in the chaos. They talk for a long time, mostly in whispers. You catch bits and pieces. Suffering, compassion. What am I even doing? Classic post-battle existential crisis, really. But something sticks with him, because over the next few days, Ashoka changes. Not in a way that a man suddenly likes a different kind of tea or starts wearing sandals. No, deeper than that. He issues an order. No more celebratory parades, no trophies, no songs of victory. Instead, he commands a moment of silence for the enemy, for the dead, for everyone. The courtiers are baffled. Some whisper that the emperor has gone soft. Others say it's just trauma talking and he'll get over it. But you see the beginnings of something bigger. A shift, not just in policy, but in purpose. You watch as Ashoka withdraws from the camp celebrations and starts spending long hours alone, reading, praying, talking with more monks. He asks questions about karma, rebirth, the nature of pain. At one point, he turns to you and says, I've built an empire of bones. What good is a crown if it rests on suffering? That night, you lie in your tent and think about that. You try to sleep, but your mind plays a reel of the past weeks in full color. Fire, screaming, bodies, gold coins scattered in the mud. You think about what it would take to be different, really different. And just when you're about to drift off, you hear music, quiet, slow, not celebratory, but mournful. A single flute, played somewhere near the emperor's tent. A song for the lost, maybe, or a lullaby for a world that doesn't quite know how to heal. You roll over, eyes open to the dark, and wonder, what happens when a conqueror decides he never wants to conquer again? When you open your eyes the next morning, it's not to a horn or a war drum. It's to the chirping of birds and the distant crackle of a fire. Just a cook fire, no siege towers today. Ashoka has called off the advance, not just delayed it, cancelled it. He sends word back to Pataliputra. The war is over. Kalinga will not be absorbed through fire and steel. It will be guided, if possible, through compassion. This is not a normal decision for an emperor. His generals hate it. They grumble in their silk tents, drawing maps and alternatives in the dirt with iron-tipped sticks. He's been bewitched by the monks. One of them mutters, "This isn't how empires are built." But Ashoka isn't listening to generals anymore. He's listening to something else, quieter, harder to ignore, his own conscience perhaps. You notice something almost immediately. Everything slows down. The camp doesn't disband, but it shifts from mobilization to reflection. The soldiers are given rest days. The war elephants are bathed instead of armored. Ashoka moves from tent to tent, not inspecting weapons, but asking men how they sleep at night. The answer mostly is not well. Then come the reforms. At first they seem small. He bans the sacrifice of animals at state feasts, orders the release of thousands of prisoners, not just because they were innocent, but because he no longer believes punishment is the path to justice. He begins to fund hospitals, not just for people but for animals too. What is the point of rule, he says to anyone who will listen, if it only serves the strong? The courtiers start calling him Ashoka the Gentle behind his back. Some mean it mockingly. Others aren't sure anymore. You see his ministers struggle to keep up. The treasurer has a complete breakdown over a new budget proposal that redirects funds from military parades to irrigation systems. You can't just plant kindness and expect rice to grow, he shouts. Ashoka smiles and says, "Let's try anyway." Soon after, word spreads that the emperor is embracing the teachings of the Buddha, sort of. Not becoming a monk, not abandoning the throne, but using Buddhist values to guide his decisions. You catch him meditating once at sunrise. He opens one eye when you approach and says, "You should try it." Calms the bloodlust. Then he snorts. Not that you had much to begin with. New orders are posted at every road and rest house, not just tax notices or decrees, but philosophy, encouragements, little sermons about tolerance, generosity, humility. People begin calling them Ashoka stones. At first, no one knows how to react. One farmer reads a post saying, "Let not one creature kill another," then sets down his knife and cries. Another merchant scoffs, saying, "That's nice, but will it raise grain prices?" Still, Ashoka keeps going. He commissions a team of scribes and stone carvers to travel the empire, inscribing his edicts in multiple languages, sometimes in places so remote that even goats look confused. You travel with them 1 week, hiking into the jungle to watch a team chisel "All men are my children" into the side of a rock face. You wonder what the trees think of that. Not everything goes smoothly. Some governors resist. There's an incident involving a monk, a basket of mangoes, and a nobleman's missing ring that sparks a minor diplomatic crisis. But the tone of the empire has changed. Where once people feared the whip, now they talk about mercy. One night, Ashoka calls you into his chamber. It's quiet, except for the soft flutter of a candle. "Do you think I've gone too far?" he asks. You blink. "Too far toward what?" He sighs. "Toward a dream. Toward ruling not through fear, but through kindness. Toward the world where power doesn't always have to be ugly." You don't answer right away, because truthfully, you're not sure. But you remember what it felt like to stand ankle deep in the blood of Kalinga. You remember the eyes of the prisoners. You remember the flute. So instead, you say, "I think it's worth trying." And Ashoka nods, like that's all he needed to hear. The years slide forward like a well-worn sandal. You're back in Pataliputra now, home of parrots, rain gutters, and the occasional overly ambitious street mime. The city has changed since the days of crown fittings and tax debates. It's softer somehow, with more flowering vines and fewer soldiers barking orders. Ashoka rules from the same palace, But his court has taken on a strange new rhythm. It's not just royal decrees anymore, it's discussion circles, listening sessions, and the occasional philosophical potluck where people bring metaphors instead of food. One poet compares the kingdom to a freshly baked naan, and no one quite understands, but everyone nods respectfully. The bureaucracy is still there, of course, endless and yawning like the mouth of a tired hippo, but now it's got moral inspectors. Yes, moral inspectors, like tax auditors, but for your soul. You meet one at a roadside tea house. She's dressed in plain saffron, sipping lentil broth and scribbling on a wax tablet. I'm checking to see if the governor has been too sarcastic in public speeches, she explains. Sarcasm is on the moral watch list. Ashoka's critics, yes, they still exist, mock these new roles. Next, we'll have a ministry of sneezing. One noble snorts. He is in fact wrong. The Ministry of Etiquette has already posted guidelines on public sneezing. Cover with your elbow and offer blessings afterward. But Ashoka isn't looking for popularity anymore. He's building something else. A legacy of values. A strange, sprawling, occasionally contradictory, deeply human legacy. You start noticing small things. New water troughs along dusty roads, shade trees planted on trade routes, public shelters for lost animals, an orphanage where the children recite maxims like, "One who feeds a pigeon feeds a king." At the heart of it all is Ashoka's relentless optimism that human beings, even tired, grumpy, sandal-chafed human beings, can be better. Sometimes he overreaches. He tries to ban all animal slaughter during full moons, and the Butchers' Guild revolts quietly by raising the price of mutton to absurd levels. He declares a day of quiet reflection and forgets it's also the Festival of Horns, during which the entire city is legally allowed to honk at anything that moves. Still, the man adapts. You watch him deliver a speech one monsoon morning, barefoot in the rain, standing on a temple step. He quotes a line from a Buddhist sutra and a line from a Jain parable in the same breath. The crowd is confused but intrigued. Boy tosses him a mango as thanks. He catches it, takes a bite and mumbles, "Needs salt?" Then he grins, because salt, like wisdom, comes slowly and only when you ask for it. Meanwhile, diplomacy is flourishing. Ashoka sends envoys not just to neighboring kingdoms, but to places far away, places you've only heard about in travelers' tales. To the Greek realms to the west, he sends scrolls of philosophy and bundles of the medicinal herbs. To the south, across ocean waves, emissaries carry seeds, maps, and a letter that reads, "Peace tastes better than victory." You see a ship leaving harbor one dawn, its sails painted with a Dharma wheel. The crew chants blessings in 3 languages. A monkey steals a biscuit from the first mate and is forgiven with alarming speed. The empire somehow is not collapsing. In fact, it's holding together better than ever. Bandits are fewer. Protests are quieter. Farmers are more confident, though they still grumble about weather, taxes, and whatever that thing is the neighbor's goat keeps eating. But there's a growing unease at court. Ashoka is getting older. He walks more slowly now, leaning on a stick carved with tiny elephants. He writes his edicts in shorter bursts. His laughter takes longer to warm up, but when it does, it still rumbles like distant thunder. He started to talk about death, not in a grim way, but in the way you might talk about moving to a smaller house with fewer responsibilities and more birdsong. One afternoon, in a quiet garden lined with jasmine, he looks at you and says, "I never thought peace would be harder than war, but I think I've finally learned how to hold both. You don't say anything. The wind answers for you, rattling sleeves in agreement. That night, you fall asleep under a canopy of stars. Somewhere in the distance, someone is singing, not a war song, but a lullaby. And for the first time in a long time, the Empire sleeps too. Morning stirs slowly now in Pataliputra. You wake to the sound of temple bells and the street hawkers calling out their daily specials: spice lentils, sandalwood oil, and something suspiciously labeled luxury radish. The air smells like damp clay and jasmine, and there's a stillness to it that's almost ceremonial. The empire is mature, maybe even sleepy, but Ashoka isn't finished yet. He's become something of a wandering gardener, not in the literal sense, though he has been seen trimming banyan roots with royal shears, but in the way he plants his ideas across the subcontinent like seeds. And now, his gaze turns outward. This is the season of missionaries. You accompany Ashoka to a small port town. Nothing fancy, just boats, crates, and goats. A small ceremony unfolds by the docks, with garlands, oil lamps, and scrolls tied in linen. Ashoka steps forward to address the group, a motley crew of monks, translators, herbalists, and one guy who may just be there for the snacks. He tells him, speak gently, listen deeply, leave every place kinder than you found it. Then he steps back and lets the tide carry his dream away. The destinations are staggering. South to Lanka, where forest temples welcome the words like returning echoes. West to the Seleucid realms, where Greek kings raise their eyebrows and then their glasses. North into the Himalayas, where monks must translate not just languages, but whole metaphors that don't work above tree line. Some historians still argue whether any of it mattered. Did those embassies really change hearts? Or were they just Ashoka's moral postcards to the world? Others point to inscriptions found thousands of miles from Pataliputra, etched in dialects Ashoka never spoke, carrying messages of non-violence and patience. One even includes a recipe for mung bean stew. Possibly an accident? Possibly a spiritual metaphor? Back in the capital, you see the effects ripple. Foreign monks stroll the palace gardens. Children chant sutras in 3 tongues. A trader from Egypt offers Ashoka a pet ibis in return for a bundle of cinnamon and a handwritten Dharma scroll. The ibis bites Ashoka and is politely returned. The bureaucracy, for its part, is flustered. There's no line item for soul exporting. One minister complains. Another scribbles interfaith hospitality in the margins of the state budget. Ashoka doesn't care. He's not trying to manage the empire now so much as inspire it. He knows that fire burns out, but warmth lingers. He holds longer audiences these days. He listens more than he speaks, nodding along as farmers, potters, and wandering bards share dreams and grievances. Sometimes he asks only one question: and what would kindness look like in your village? And then he waits. You witness a strange scene. One twilight, Ashoka, sitting in the middle of a busy road, sketching ideas in the dust with a stick. Passers-by gather, first curious, then engaged. A girl suggests a traveling school. A weaver recommends Dharma symbols woven into market flags. A wrestler, confusing the conversation, offers to carry a monk to the next town on his back. Ashoka says yes to all of it. The roads are different now too. Not just stone and mile markers, but little things. Shelters every mile or so, where even stray dogs seem to pause in reverence. Painted signs offer moral riddles. Who is wealthier, the one with gold or the one with sleep? A camel spits near the sign, which seems to answer the question. But not everyone loves the change. Old generals mutter that the army is too polite. Young nobles sigh over the loss of hunting trips. What's the point of ruling if you can't chase something with a spear? One says, before being reassigned to squirrel sanctuary management. Yet even critics can't deny the results. Trade thrives, conflicts fizzle, famine is rare. For now, peace holds, not by force, but by some slow-growing glue of shared decency. And Ashoka, for all his flaws and quirks, walks through his twilight years like someone trying to water every plant before nightfall. You see him crouch beside a dying fig tree, whispering, "You've done your best." His children visit less often now. Some are busy governing. Others have wandered far. One son has started a monastery at the edge of a mountain cliff, where it's said the wind itself chants the Dharma if you sit quietly enough. Ashoka doesn't mind. He trusts that the seeds will do their work, that not all echoes need to return. And so, one night, as the moon watches through temple rafters and a breeze smells of cardamom and ink, Ashoka writes what may be his final letter. He addresses it to anyone who is still trying. It reads, "Be the kind of fire that warms, not burns. Be the kind of voice that listens before it speaks. Be the kind of ruler, even of just your own heart, that leaves behind less fear and more shelter." You read it over his shoulder. Then he adds a small postscript. "Also, drink more water." Then, Hichachi. You're on the road again, though it feels different now, less like conquest, more like pilgrimage. You move through towns and forests and mountain passes, but not in a hurry. Ashoka has slowed. His stride is measured, almost meditative. You suspect he started counting his steps like monks count beads, but make no mistake, he's still working. Now, the obsession is with animals. Yes, animals. Four-legged, two-winged, slithering, mooing, bleating, pecking creatures. You thought you were here for statecraft, but suddenly you're up at dawn, building shade shelters for goats. You've witnessed the emperor issue an edict outlawing unnecessary animal slaughter, followed immediately by one establishing a veterinary network, not for humans. Oh no, that's someone else's ministry, but for parrots and oxen. It's not as strange as it sounds. Well, okay, it is, but there's logic behind it. Ashoka sees animals not just as living things, but as citizens in their own right. Creatures of Dharma, if not quite philosophers. One time, you're caught in a rainstorm while overseeing the construction of a royal turtle pond. Ashoka stands beside you, drenched and smiling, and says, "If the turtles are content, we've done well today." A passing scribe mutters something about budget overruns on tortoise infrastructure, but nobody listens. You begin to see the shift in the empire's mood. Kindness, it seems, is contagious. You spot children feeding pigeons instead of chasing them. A soldier takes up the habit of moving ants off the path with a blade of grass. In one village, people plant fruit trees just so wandering monks and monkeys will have something to eat. Still, not everyone embraces the zoological revolution. Some farmers grumble that deer are raiding their crops with a kind of smug entitlement. One particularly defiant merchant paints his oxen like tigers just to mess with the census. Ashoka, for his part, doesn't force compliance. He persuades. He carves his messages into rocks and pillars, not just in Sanskrit, but in every regional tongue he can commission. Some are gentle, almost lullaby-like. All beings desire safety. Others are snappy. Do not kill. It's boring. One is mysteriously poetic. Even the worm sings if the soil is kind. You see one of these pillars installed beside a busy road. As it's raised into position, travelers stop to read it aloud. Some nod. One spits, unimpressed. A child hugs it. You decide that's a win? The old edicts were about law and order. These new ones, they're about conscience. A different kind of rule. Less obey or else more. What if we just cared more? At night, around the campfire, Ashoka talks about dreams. Not the ones you have while sleeping, though he does once mention a flying yak that sings in Fragrant, but the kind that hover over a nation like faint stars. I dream of quiet roads, he says, of people who argue kindly, of cows that live to a ridiculous old age. You smile, then yawn. You've heard that the Empire's crime rate has dropped, not because of harsher penalties, but because people genuinely don't want to harm one another anymore. Wild, right? It's not utopia. Let's be real. There's still thievery, envy, people arguing over rice prices. But there's also more apology, more sharing, more stray dogs with names. Ashoka is aging, and he knows it. His walks are shorter, his silences longer, but his gaze is still sharp, especially when watching something tiny, a snail crossing a path, a spider building its geometry in a sunbeam. Once, during a visit to a riverside village, he stops mid-ceremony to rescue a bee from a clay bowl of milk. The officiant looks mildly offended. Ashoka simply shrugs. He seemed thirsty. There's talk of succession now, whispered in hallways and over lentil stew. Ashoka's children are scattered, some studious, some ambitious. One rumored to have joined a troupe of traveling illusionists. You suspect Ashoka doesn't care who wears the crown, as long as they water the plants and read the edict with care. He begins drafting letters for the future, not to his heirs, but to strangers, people not yet born. Each one is different. Some are stern, some are silly. One ends with a riddle. When is power not power? Followed by, if you figure it out, leave mangoes at this tree. You imagine some archaeologist, centuries from now, scratching their head beside a mango-stained stone. And then there's the letter he writes to you. You find it tucked in a scroll pouch, addressed simply to the witness. It says, "You've seen my anger. You've seen my peace. You've stepped in goat dung beside me, and you've watched pillars rise from the dust. Tell it true, not perfect, but true. Let others know that an emperor tried, that he listened to snails, and sometimes to his people, that he chose the long road, not because it was easy, but because it led toward less cruelty." You fold the letter carefully. The fire crackles beside you. The wind shifts, carrying the odd edict. You wake early now, not because you must, but because the air feels different, cooler, crisper, like the Empire itself has taken a deep breath. There's a stillness before dawn, broken only by birds, and occasionally a monk sneezing loudly. The Emperor's camp is quieter than it once was. Fewer guards, fewer banners, more trees. Ashoka spends his mornings walking barefoot, not in some royal garden, but along dusty village paths. You follow, of course, tiptoeing around dew-wet grass and the occasional sleeping dog. Sometimes he greets farmers by name. Sometimes he says nothing at all, just nods, just notices. He's in observation mode again. One morning, he stops to watch a group of children racing paper boats in a canal. One of the boats has a tiny flag, an elephant drawn in green ink. Ashoka smiles at that. Then he turns to you and says, "They're better diplomats than we ever were." Another day, he sits beneath a fig tree and listens to an old woman explain the history of her mud house in extraordinary detail. You want to leave. Surely there are more pressing matters. But Ashoka leans forward, fascinated. He later tells you that a home story is as important as any treaty. You're not sure if he's being profound or just sleepy. The grand decisions now seem smaller, or maybe the small things are the grand ones. And yet, policy continues. Ashoka has started a new initiative, planting medicinal gardens at crossroads, lavender for calming, basil for cleansing, neem for just about everything. Let the roads heal the people, he declares. A little dramatic maybe, but the gardens bloom anyway. You're sent to oversee one such garden outside a village called Sarupnagar. It's hot, the soil is stubborn, and the local ghosts keep eating the marigolds. You write a report and send it back to Pataliputra. A week later, you receive a royal reply. Try fencing. Also, bless the goats. This is the kind of leadership Ashoka now offers. Part philosopher, part village grandpa. He's softer in his tone but sharper in his questions. He rarely gives orders outright. Instead, he asks, "What would compassion look like here?" And somehow, people figure it out. You hear stories spreading across the empire of a man who gave up poaching to teach children how to track animals without harm, of a merchant who turned his spice shop into a free kitchen on monsoon nights, of a tax collector who declared emotional stress as a reason to reduce someone's dues. It's weird and warm and working, but there are cracks too. In the East, a governor resigns in protest. He says the empire has gone soft, that elephants don't need ethics, that a sword is still sharper than a sermon. His words echo, and some agree. Ashoka, for his part, doesn't retaliate. He sends a letter. No threats, no reprimands, just one line. "Perhaps you are right, but what if you're not?" The letter goes viral. Well, as viral as a stone inscription can. Still, you feel tension. Not everyone wants to rule through kindness. Not everyone sees value in sparing worms, and some just miss the drama of conquest. Ashoka hosts a council in response, not of nobles, but of teachers, farmers, mothers, weavers, healers, people who rarely sit on cushions of authority. You watch them listen more than speak. One weaver suggests making clothes cheaper for monks. A teacher proposes a traveling school caravan. A mother simply says, "Tell more stories." Ashoka takes notes. He actually takes notes. Afterward, he tells you, empires die when they stop listening. Dharma lives in echoes. You don't really understand that, but it sounds wise. At night, the stars feel closer. Maybe it's the altitude. You're camped near the foothills now, or maybe it's just that your heart has softened a little. You dream of deer and dialects, of edicts chiseled not into stone, but into habit. There's a rhythm to your days now. Wake, walk, wonder. You measure time not by war campaigns, but by mango ripenings and monsoon shifts. You keep a journal titled "Things I Didn't Expect to Matter," and it's getting long. Today's entry: the way Ashoka thanked a bee. One afternoon, Ashoka invites you to sit beside him on a hilltop. He doesn't say much, just watches the valley. There are clouds rolling in, and the wind smells like damp earth and jasmine. Finally, he says, "I hope they forget me." You blink. He continues, "Not my name. That's inevitable. But my face, my titles, the size of my throne. Let them forget that. Let them remember how it felt to live under gentleness. Let them copy that. You write that down. You know others will need to hear it. And in the quiet that follows, you realize this isn't about legacy anymore. It's about momentum, about keeping something rolling forward. Slow, deliberate, kind. The wind picks up. The rain begins to fall. A deer appears in the distance, entirely unbothered. You stay on the hill a little longer. The empire below doesn't glitter. It doesn't shout, but it hums. You're back in the capital now, and everything feels smaller. Not physically. Pataliputra still stretches along the river like a grand serpent, and the palaces still gleam when the sun hits their stone just right. But the mood has changed. Not worse, not better, just quieter. Even the bureaucrats speak softer. Ashoka's court sessions now begin with a poem, a real one, not some stiff ceremonial verse. Sometimes it's about a plum tree, sometimes about a regret. Once, it was just a haiku about a very persistent squirrel. You watch generals squirm through these moments. They're not used to metaphors. You, on the other hand, have started bringing your own notebook. Today, a merchant arrives with a dispute about river tolls. Before, this would have triggered 100 scrolls, a shouting match, and maybe a small uprising. But Ashoka listens, strokes his beard, which now has streaks of white, and says, "What if the river taxed us instead?" Everyone blinks. Then someone coughs. Then somehow a fairer system is born. That's how things go now. Less declaration, more deliberation. Less empire, more empathy. You've noticed something else. Ashoka doesn't sit on the throne anymore. He gave it away. Not symbolically. He literally donated the gilded seat to a monastery for use as a reading bench. His new perch is a simple wooden stool with one leg slightly shorter than the others. It rocks when he leans wrong. He never fixes it. "I like the reminder," he says. And yet, even as his power humbles itself, his influence grows. Ambassadors now come not just to sign treaties, but to ask questions. One from Egypt brings scrolls and spicy olives. Another from Greece asks to study Ashoka's edicts in their original Prakrit. He even tries to grow a dharma garden back home, though the climate doesn't cooperate. "All my lavender turned to dust," the man sighs. Ashoka gives him a jar of honey and a lesson in patience. There's a diplomatic mission to the south that you help plan. The route avoids conflict zones, stops at sacred trees, and includes a puppet show at every third village. You think that's a joke? It's not. The emperor insists. A puppet is harder to fear than a sword. Somewhere along the way, you realize fear is no longer a tool in this empire. It's not useful here, not needed, not welcome. Of course, not everyone is thrilled. A rebellion flares up in the northwest. Small but loud. A warlord who missed the old days. The clanging drums, the decisive strikes, the spoils. He calls Ashoka a king of dreams. Some in the court brace for retaliation. Ashoka writes a letter. It's long, thoughtful, deeply annoying to those who wanted swift vengeance. It's also public, carved into stone, posted at crossroads, read aloud by children. It ends with, "I cannot force your peace, but I can offer mine." The rebellion burns out faster than expected, not from fear, but from boredom. There's no great enemy to fight, no martyrdom to achieve, just composting initiatives and puppet shows. The warlord resigns, opens a goat sanctuary. You're not even surprised anymore. Later that year, a comet appears in the sky. People panic. Ashoka doesn't. He orders every astronomer, monk, and village storyteller to gather and debate it into submission. They don't figure out what it means, but the debates are delightful. You attend one where a young girl insists the comet is a flaming teardrop from a lovesick sun. Ashoka claps the loudest. That night, he tells you, maybe the universe cries for joy sometimes. You consider stealing that line for your next letter home. In quieter hours, Ashoka begins dictating new edicts. Not laws exactly, more like reminders, carved into stone and placed not in capitals, but in small towns and dusty crossroads where goats outnumber people. One reads, "Do not lie, but if you must lie, lie in service of kindness." Another says simply, "Feed the ants." They remember. You think he's joking. He's not. The ants are extremely well fed now. Then one morning, he tells you about his dream. "I was a tree," he says. "No crown, no voice, just roots and branches. And the wind asks me questions. You wait. I didn't answer. I just rustled. You pretend to understand. This is what life has become. Strange, slow, rich with rustling. You find yourself noticing smaller things. The curl of banana leaves after rain. The way tea smells before it boils. The fact that your sandals squeak only on Wednesdays. There's space in your head now. Room for wonder. And that might be Ashoka's greatest conquest yet. Not the war he ended, not the peace he built, but the way he rewired how people look at the world. Not just as subjects of an empire, but as participants in a great, slow, kind unfolding. You write that down too. Even now, couriers come and go. Children play in the palace gardens. Someone teaches a goose to bow. You suspect Ashoka's behind that. He denies it. But the goose does bow. You smile. The empire hums. You're walking with him again. Ashoka, that is. But this time, the palace corridors feel softer, almost reluctant to echo. He walks a little slower now. You match his pace. His footsteps aren't weak, just thoughtful, like each one is asking a question before it lands. Outside, the monsoon has come and gone, leaving the mango trees fat with fruit and the courtyards damp with memory. The air smells like wet stone and turmeric. Somewhere nearby, children are giggling through a dharma riddle. What is heavy as an elephant but weighs nothing at all? Answer, a secret. Ashoka chuckles when he hears it. That's a good one, he murmurs. I'll steal it for my next edict. You believe him. Today's plan is simple. Visit a monastery on the city's edge, offer a prayer, listen to a few chants, and return in time for boiled jackfruit and sunset. But of course, plans with Ashoka are like trying to leash a breeze. Halfway there, he stops beside a field of lotus flowers and tells a story. I used to step on these, he says, pointing to the petals. Didn't even see them. Now he kneels and touches one. You wait. The sun waits. Even the birds seem to hush. At the monastery, the monks welcome him like an old friend. No fanfare, no titles. They pour tea, sweeten it with honey, and talk about dreams. One monk says he dreamed of riding a cloud shaped like a buffalo. Another insists the moon is an egg waiting to hatch something divine. Ashoka listens, nodding, smiling like he already knows the punchline, but wants them to tell it anyway. Then he teaches them a game. It's called What If? Simple rules. Someone makes up an impossible question, and the others try to answer it with kindness, not logic. Someone asks, what if the ocean could talk? Ashoka replies, then we'd all be better listeners. It's ridiculous. It's perfect. After tea, he walks through their library. Nothing grand, just scrolls stacked neatly, the scent of ink and sandalwood curling in the air. He pauses at one shelf and runs his fingers along the parchment spines. "These are heavier than swords," he says, then adds, "but they hurt less." You write that down too. On the way back, a small group of villagers waits at the gates. They've come to ask about a boundary dispute. They look nervous, muddy. One of them holding a squirming chicken like a security blanket. Ashoka doesn't wave them away. He sits on a low wall, invites them to do the same, and listens as the chicken clucks solemnly. The villagers argue, softly at first, then louder. Ashoka stays silent, just picking at a piece of grass. When they finally pause, breathless and defensive, he smiles. "I think the chicken has the best case," he says. The tension breaks like a dam. Laughter spills out, awkward and healing. He proposes they share the disputed land, raise vegetables, keep the chicken as mayor. The villagers agree. The chicken seems confused but proud. Later, as you walk the final stretch home, he asks, "Do you think people will remember me?" You almost trip. Not because it's a strange question, but because it is the first time he's asked something without already knowing the answer. You think for a moment. Then you say, "They'll remember how you made them feel, even the ones who never met you." Ashoka hums. "That's the best kind of memory," he says. "Soft, rooted." Back in the palace, someone has lit oil lamps along the corridors. Their flames flicker in a soft wind you can't quite feel. The walls seem to glow a little warmer. The floor creaks like it's telling old stories to itself. In the garden, a scribe waits with a chisel and a half-finished slab of granite. "Another edict, sire?" Ashoka shakes his head. "Not tonight." Instead, he sits under a flowering tree. Just sits, hands folded, eyes skyward. You don't speak. You just sit too. The wind rustles the branches. Somewhere far off, someone is playing a flute. You're not sure if it's real or memory. Doesn't matter. Ashoka closes his eyes. You think, he's not going anywhere. Not really. Not the man who turned a continent with silence, who traded conquest for curiosity, who taught children riddles and warlords peace. He'll stay in the stories, the stones, the softened footsteps of those who follow, and in moments like this, quiet, rooted, kind. You're back in the garden. It's early now, just before dawn. The sky is still deciding what color to be, and the world is quiet in that hesitant way it only is when the sun is somewhere backstage, clearing its throat. Ashoka is already awake. He's sitting by a basin of water, splashing his face like a man rinsing off 100 lifetimes. You almost don't want to interrupt, but he sees you and waves you over with that same open palm gesture he's always had. The one that says, "Come on, let's do this together." Today isn't just another day, it's a day of letting go. Word has spread. The emperor is stepping back. Not abdicating, not retreating, just softening his grip. He says, power's like a bowl of rice. Hold it too tightly and it spills everywhere. So he's given more to the council, more to the monks, the people, the villages with their chickens and mango trees. And he's keeping less for himself, just enough for morning tea and maybe 1 or 2 more poems. You walk with him to the Hall of Echoes, a room named not for its acoustics, but for the hundreds of stone pillars inscribed with past words, edicts, confessions, questions. They lean slightly, like they're bowing to the reader. Ashoka runs his hand along one and stops. I used to think these made me immortal. Then he grins. Now I think immortality is overrated, especially if you still have to wait in line for figs. You laugh. So does he. Inside the hall, scribes and ministers have gathered. They look somber, But Ashoka breaks the mood by bringing sweet buns wrapped in banana leaves. No one talks policy on an empty stomach, he insists. And he's right. The meeting becomes less about governance and more about gratitude. He listens more than he speaks. He watches more than he corrects. And when he finally does talk, it's just this. Everything I've built, I leave in your hands. Keep it kind. Then he walks out. That's it. No ceremony, no parade. Just a click of sandals on marble and the faint rustle of his saffron shawl. You find him an hour later in the scriptorium. Not writing, carving. On a piece of teak wood. Something small. What's it say? You ask. He holds it up. 3 words in Pali. Apamada Amataga. Mindfulness is the path to immortality. That again? You tease. Bit on the nose, don't you think? Ashoka just smiles. Later he visits the stables, not for a ride but to brush his old horse, the black one with a white star. You'd forgotten about her. She whinnies softly, and he nuzzles her neck like a schoolboy. She knew me before I knew myself, he says. He gives her an extra handful of grain. By midday, he's by the river. Not Ganges this time. Something quieter, a tributary that barely shows up on maps but hums like a lullaby. He sits on a flat rock, dangles his feet in the water, and watches dragonflies argue about the weather. You sit beside him. Neither of you speak. And when the sun begins to dip, casting everything in honey-colored light, Ashoka clears his throat. I think I've finally figured it out, he says. You wait. What? You ask, almost whispering. The point, he says. It wasn't the empire, or the laws, or even the peace. You lean closer. It was this, he says, gesturing to the water, the breeze, the moment. Being here, fully, without wanting to be anywhere else. And there it is, the secret, not carved in stone, not carried on banners, just spoken between friends. As night falls, he heads back to the palace one last time, not for any duty, just to light a single lamp in a small alcove, the kind no one notices, but he always liked. You ask him why, he shrugs, so someone else won't have to fumble in the dark. Then he turns to you. You'll keep walking, won't you? He asks. You nod. Of course you will. Ashoka nods, satisfied, then walks away. Not into legend, not into history, just into the hallway's softening dusk. You stand there a while, watching the flame flicker. Then you turn and keep walking.